Have you ever not slept for so long that you started hallucinating? What was your experience? Yeah, after 70 hours or so, it's pretty disorienting, and rational thinking starts to get very slow. The hallucinations are not realistic, but are more like gaps in your vision that are shaped like things. Might see a silhouette at a distance, or briefly around a corner. Very difficult to function in this state. Would not recommend. At the 24-hour mark I start to no longer feel tired and start getting into a slightly euphoric, calm state. At 36 hours my short-term memory goes to shit, unable to keep any train of thought. Visual and auditory hallucinations are common. Up to the 48-hour mark my speech starts slurring until I can't even complete sentences. I suffered from horrific insomnia about 12 years ago. I was on Lexapro, and one of the side effects is insomnia. At the time, that wasn't well documented. So I tried everything from Ambien to alcohol, so I could sleep. I would usually get about a 3-hour nap at most, before being awake again. I would go 3 to 5 days without sleeping. Eventually, I hit the point of desperation, and start recreational substances to try and knock myself out. There were several occasions of hallucinations, but the one that sticks out is truly terrible. I was on day 6 without sleeping at least 5 hours. I was laying in bed and a friend came in to start talking with me. We had many great conversations since our friendship began, but hadn't talked in a while at that point. I told him how bad I was struggling and that honestly, killing myself would have been easier. He said he felt the same way many times, but that it was a terrible idea and I knew how badly it had messed up his family. When I looked at him, he was a bloody mess on the side of his face. Jaw ripped apart, teeth missing, but talking to me like nothing was wrong. He had been dead for a few years at that point. Suicide. Shot himself in his garage after years of substance abuse. And I just had a 3-hour conversation with a hallucination of a dead friend. I ended up switching meds to Celexa and my sleep issues disappeared within a month. So, if you are having sleeping issues please, go see a document. It's a dark place that damn near took me. Overseas on a deployment. Started getting sleep deprived for a period of time. Started hallucinating the big date/palm trees moving across the road like in the Lord of the Rings, when the trees walk. I went roughly 4 days on 5 hours sleep total. I could function fine, but I would just constantly hear things like people mumbling right next to me. A buddy of mine landed a painting job working inside of a big commercial building, and he basically stayed in the place for 6 days straight smoking crystal meth and painting to meet his deadline and avoid hiring a crew to help him. On the 6th day the building caught fire and he ran into the lobby and was pulling people out into the streets and yelling to call 911. The fireman showed up and couldn't locate a fire because there was none. He was hallucinating. Ex-addict. Was driving home after a 3-day meth bender. Needed food so drove into a McDonald's drive-thru. When asked for my order I replied McChicken meal, please. Then they asked me again and I said McChicken meal, please. Then they asked me again and I was like, can't you fucking hear me? McChicken meal. And that's when I realized I wasn't actually saying anything, I was just replying in my head. I used to abuse Adderall and would stay up 3 days straight working on bullshit projects that I never finished. Anyway, one time I was at the end of a 3-day bender where I had taken about 10 days worth of Adderall. As I laid down to sleep, I started hearing my mom arguing with my brother and his girlfriend. It went on for a long time, and I was like, surely they have to be at work and this shit will end soon. Eventually my brother's baby started to cry, and the adults were too busy arguing to calm her down. I said fuck that, and stormed out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and the house was completely empty. I stayed up for 3 days straight, when I was 17. On the 3rd day, I kept hearing people call my name, as if they wanted to ask me a question. It didn't help that I also thought it would be a good idea to go to school that day. Multiple times a day, I would bolt upright and look around to see who wanted to my attention, only to see my fellow students huddled over their work. It got worse as the day went. My friends were a little worried about how weird I was acting. I walked home after school, listening to my headphones as usual, but I still kept hearing someone call my name. The music made it worse. Whatever I was hearing was already kind of muffled, and having a song playing in my ears only seemed to obscure it more. When I finally got home, I told my mom I wasn't feeling well, went to my room, and went straight to sleep at 4 in the afternoon. As nodded off, I heard that voice calling for me again, making me jerk out of my sleep. This repeated a couple times until I convinced myself that I already told my mom I was sick, and if she really needed me, she could come get me. I finally went to sleep and didn't wake until 2 AM to use the bathroom, and then went to sleep afterwards again until 9 AM the next day. I was an idiot. I hadn't slept for about 72 hours when I went to the doc gave me Ambien. I go home, get in bed and take one. A few minutes later, the floor was covered in water and the walls were melting. It was raining outside, and the water on my windows was marching in formation. I've never known whether that was sleep deprivation or the effects of Ambien. I've never taken another. During exam week I pulled 3 all-nighters in the library between tests. The library was open 24 hours, so I'd just stay up all night making note cards, then go take an exam during the day. I lived off campus and didn't want to spend the gas money. I'd go to the most isolated area, but the library would pretty much be cleared out by midnight. I started to see glimpses of people, and I thought it was a bunch of students fucking with me, but there was no one on that floor. I thought the lights went off at some point and maybe it was a sensor, so I started jumping around to reactivate it, but obviously, it was light the whole time. After a while I start to become seriously paranoid and I start hearing voices and things like that. It's not very fun. I have some serious issues with sleep, and sometimes it will get to the point where I will start seeing things out the corners of my eye that aren't actually happening, and I manage to scare the shit out of myself. Please get enough sleep. Don't fall into the habit of staying up for days on end. The longer you stay up, the harder it is to fall asleep. Okay, story time. My mom suffers from narcolepsy, and one of the first treatments they gave her basically drove her also completely insane. She was up for 5 days. One day I walked into her bedroom hearing her talking to someone. I look around and ask her who she is talking to, and she tells me the lady in red. There is no one in the room at all, just us. I ask where is the lady, and she says the lady sits on the dresser and talks to her all night. I was like 14 at the time, so I went to the kitchen and hid her medicine until my stepdad got home and could take her to the hospital. The doctor was super upset about the meds her doctor had given her. It was way too much. Anyway, she stopped seeing the lady after they got all that straightened out. Fucking shadow people. It's bad for you. You shouldn't do it. But if you're asking this question, you're the type to try. Remember, it's not real, and relax. Go to sleep. After 30 hours I started seeing insects on the walls and on my desk that weren't there. Might have just been the light or paranoia because I'm massively afraid of spiders. Made it to 50 hours without really seeing anything else though. Spent a few weeks only getting about 4 hours of sleep a night. My brain started seeing, from the corners of my eyes, black things dropping from the ceiling that looked like giant spiders. I started making sure I got enough sleep. I had really bad sleep problems for years. At one point I went to a party having been awake for 36 hours when arriving. I didn't really hallucinate also because I couldn't sleep, but when I finally did, I got the sleep I needed. The problem was mostly falling asleep. For me, stress and lack of sleep triggers some form of sleep paralysis and these weird dreams where I'm lying down somewhere and I can't see properly and I can't get up because everything is just so blurry and spinning around. It made me wake up in cold sweats, and I remember once waking up and falling back asleep so many times because I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open that I called my mom crying because I did not know whether I was awake or not. I'm better now. It's almost a regular occurrence for me by now because I suffer from insomnia. There are 3 different types of hallucinations for me. Funny useless shit I know is fake. Shit that could be real or not. Extremely scary and traumatic shit I know is fake, but rattles me up every single time. Usually, they appear in that order. Pro tip, if you are experiencing visual hallucinations and you aren't sure whether something is real or not, take a photo with your smartphone and look at that. It is very unlikely that you hallucinate the same shit twice and in the exact same position. Works for me, at last. I was a passenger in a car, and looking out the window the shadows from trees would morph and grow and move. It was kinda scary, but I enjoyed it. It was like drugs, before I did drugs. Don't do drugs. Do sleep. Once in my early 20s I took acid and didn't sleep at all for like 3 days. At one point on the 3rd day a door told me to go fuck myself, and I really wasn't sure if it was from the drugs building up over time or because I was so tired. I had a similar experience babysitting people on acid. One of my buddies said the door was talking shit about his mom and then proceeded to try to fight the door. That was probably one of weirdest experiences I have ever witnessed, and I have babysat a lot of people on psychedelics. So in training to join the British Army Infantry everyone does a defense exercise. Basically you deploy onto the area then spend 72 straight hours digging trenches, no sleep, no rest. It's a double whammy between sleep deprivation and exhaustion. Although I never hallucinated, I did pass out onto some bloke though. I did see a few blokes experience crazy stuff. One bloke walked into a foggy field and was missing for hours. Once he realized he was lost he laid on the floor, flipping between the channels on his radio saying hello and hoping someone would hear him. Another bloke who was a Welsh speaker lost the ability to distinguish between the two languages. He'd speak to you in Welsh, then get annoyed when you didn't understand him, believing he was speaking perfect English. In college there we had a major group project. We all stayed on campus for 48 hours and no sleep. Let's just say that by the end we were all hallucinating while writing our code. At one point I remember thinking my code was talking, but the music had just started playing. Visions. People existing where they shouldn't be. Like walking across rafters and ducks high above factory floors. Memory loss. Irritability like you've never been through before. Pain. You lose time. An hour here, an hour there. Your cognitive abilities decline. I've gone week-long stretches where I probably averaged between 10 to 15 hours sleep over a 7-day period, so many times that it became normal. It wasn't that the stretches themselves were long, maybe 20 hours at most, but there was no deep sleep in the downtime. Without deep sleep you start to go mad, and I've been pretty close to going over the edge. I once worked a 17-hour shift. I was working an event for a cocktail company. Work started early in the morning, and I drove about 30 minutes to their company premises. The event was a private wedding in a field, and we were a pop-up cocktail bar. After loading all the fresh fruit onto the van, I was driven about an hour away to the venue, where we unloaded the van. We had to physically set up a metal bar, stock it up, prep ingredients, decorate it and get all the glassware ready. People started ordering drinks at 3 PM, and it went on late into the night. Although we had breaks, we were on our feet all night. The person in charge of our van had forgotten to pack a light, so we loaded the van back up in the dark. Almost ran over one of the guests who had passed out in the middle of the field and I cut myself pretty badly. We got back to the barn storage at about 4 AM, and I had to drive home. I was so worn out I was seeing cows everywhere. I kept having to stop for cows in the road, cows in the bushes on the side of the road. But none of it was real. When I eventually got to lighter roads I stopped seeing shit that wasn't there, and I'll never put myself through something so dangerous again. Marine boot camp keeps you awake for the first 3 days straight, and if you fell asleep you'd get fucked up real quick by the drill instructors. After 48 hours I started hallucinating lights/swirls in my vision, and had to mentally keep myself awake, while doing absolutely nothing most of the time there. Dozing off for even a second was a death sentence, so had good motivation. When I finally got to sleep I was woken up an hour into it by a rackmet because I had fire watch, and I could have sworn it was my dad. Like 100% I hallucinated my father waking me up because I was so tired/lost/confused. I was going through a lot with an abusive ex. He'd keep me up for ages, and when I could finally sleep I would have nightmares. So I started hallucinating spiders in my ceiling, and it felt like hands were touching me. It lasted for days. Since the hallucinations messed up the little sleep I got diagnosed with a beginning psychosis, and shit's a typical disorder mostly because I didn't dare tell them about my ex, so they couldn't set a PTSD diagnosis for me. They started giving me drugs to help the psychosis, but since it was because of my ex and lack of sleep it didn't really help, and I had to deal with just being drugged as well. Oh, you mean the shadow people? Yeah, we are acquainted. Insomnia worsened by hypomania meant I would frequently sleep 2 hours or less a night. Not uncommon to be awake 72 hours straight. Generally it's the sensation that someone just walked past the edges of your peripheral vision, but when you turn to get a better look there's nothing there. Have also seen black masses skitter across the floor. During my time in the military, there was a time where I worked 126 hours in a 7-day stretch, in full gear, standing/walking most of each 18 or so hour day. By the 6th day, I was falling asleep while walking, and seeing people in my peripheral vision. I would look quickly, and they weren't there. Then I'd see one again, etc etc. We just called them shadow people. Anyways, it fucking sucked. Earlier this year I took my partner to the ER because he was hallucinating. He was exhausted and dehydrated. His hallucinations involved having snippets of conversations with people who weren't in the room. On the way to the ER he asked me where did they go? I said who? He said your friends who were in the back seat. There was no one with us. The day after I brought my son home from the hospital, the striped curtains in my room were billowing in the breeze. Except there was no breeze. The stripes were just shimmying and swaying. I'd had 8, maybe 9 hours total in 4 days, and was running on pure adrenaline and narcotics. C-section. I don't recommend it. When my daughter was born I had what I imagine is pretty standard new parent sleep deprivation. Let's just say I did not handle it well. Several times I would get to sleep, I would wake up not knowing where the baby was, and having short panic attacks. The worst night, I woke up holding my pillow in my arms thinking I was rocking the baby. My eyes were blurry, but I could see there was something covering her head, pillowcase. I couldn't get it off, and I started panicking thinking my baby was suffocating. I ended up ripping my pillow into shreds trying to get my baby out, when my wife walks in from the other room holding the baby and asking what the hell I was doing.